Goodbye, Man Society. It is your host with the most, Shadow Loke, back at you with another video. Yeah, two today. Now, I wanted to talk about something that I was asked by one of my subscribers that caught me off guard, right? I was like, oh, a non-street related question or gang related question, right? Which was if I had seen the video that Marvelous had discussed about, Jesus being a pedophile and what do I think about that? And American Cholo had spoke on it, on his podcast and, what's my opinion on all that, or if I know what, they were talking about. And yes, actually, yes, I do tap into Marvelous Minds. Go subscribe to, his channel. Um, Now, when it comes to the Jesus that people think is Jesus, right? The one that's in everybody's living room, especially growing up in a Catholic home, you probably know what I'm talking about. The famous portrait that um, Da Vinci painted, right? Which is the way people think. I guess Jesus looks like, right? That Caucasian guy and whatever, which is not Jesus at all, right? But that is actually the son's pope, right? Pope Alexander the Sixth, right? Um, Now that was his son, which was Sheshara um, Borgia, right? Which they were the rulers, I guess you could say, of what is known as the Renaissance, right? Of of that time frame, right? And they were not the best people, bro. They were pretty bad individuals, right? He was seen as different, as before the Pope was seen as just a spiritual individual, right? He felt like the title of Pope needs to go back to its roots of more of a king, like a king type person than a spiritual type person, right? More of a ruler, you get me? More of somebody who has influence and power. That's what he wanted, right? Them, the family of Jeshua, which everyone thinks is the Jesus, right? His family obviously coming from the kingdom of um, Alexia, right? Which is now like, which is what Spain is, and then they ended up to the kingdom of Neapolis, which is now what's Italy, right? Well, they ended up climbing up the ranks, right? Well, his father, right, Alexander, and then ended up becoming, Pope. And when he was Pope, he was a Pope that was seen as, somebody that ended up changing the way people seen, the Pope, right, to fit more into what was then modern day times, right? The Renaissance time, right? Because the Renaissance times was more of a bright and more of a little bit more of a freedom, and it's a time frame in our history that people always, it always catches their eye because of the amount of art that came from that time frame, not only from Da Vinci but from like Raphael and others, right? And not only that, but the amount of information that we had from that time frame, because a lot of that information was being kept, right? um so we have a pretty good idea of those times, right? So we know that this Pope was somebody who would like to drink, who used to throw orgy parties. He had multiple mistresses. He had a lot of kids. As a matter of fact, Georgia was a child with one of his mistress, right? So he had a lot of kids, right? He was somebody who was more of a party and more of a ruler, more of a dictator type shit, right? As a matter of fact, I know that these kind of topics, they a lot of people get offended because it deals with religion, and I know how the Catholic Church feels about these kind of topics and stuff like that. But I'm only speaking on the history, right? Hate it or love it. Um, he was one of the ones that changed the New World, which is considered what's South America, right? Because that is in his times when he was there was when Columbus started to now sail the seas, right? And he pretty much is the one that gave Columbus the green light to go ahead and enslave these indigenous folks and all of that, right? Despite what the church wants to say, whatever, that is not true. He was giving the individual the green light, right? That it was okay, because keep this in mind that at that time slavery was already starting to be seen some type of way, right? But since it was this new world, and these indigenous folks, he kind of felt like they had a little bit more liberty to enslave them without it creating some type of ruckus, right? So he did that, right? Because in his time frame was when a lot of what is now known as, South America, and the split, right, when it comes to cultures. He's the one that pretty much is the one that was splitting all of that, and that till this day is still like that, right? Like, from what we're talking about was from, like, like Portugal and Spain and Brazil and all of that, right? When it comes to cultures and language and all that, he pretty much is the one that divided those areas. Alexander, meaning, right? So he's somebody who was very influential, right? So now his son Jeshurun was, coming up, and he grew up spoiled, obviously, coming from wealth. He had the finest things, swords and horses and stuff that only the elite had, right? So he was a spoiled individual, right? So he grew up privileged and kind of being one of those privileged kids that are kind of like not the best of people, right? They take everything for granted. So the individual was, always a troubled individual. But because of the influence that his father had, he ended up actually, and this is something that has never been heard or even done, since, he actually ended up becoming a bishop at the age of 15, and he ended up becoming a cardinal at the age of 18, which, that position should be given to those who earn it and stuff like that, right? It was something that was, hold, the highest of titles, right? As a matter of fact, that's the reason why they were all older, right? You kind of had to work your way up there. But in him being so fucking young and already giving these titles, that, keep this in mind, back then those titles had way more power and influence that they do now, even though now they still have a lot of power and influence. So you can only imagine back then, right? So imagine being at that age and spoiled, and now having all that power, and you already know what power does, right? It tends to corrupt, right? So this individual was a pretty, scandalous individual, somebody who, he slept with his own sister. He's somebody who murdered his brother, murdered his brother-in-law, allegedly, because he was sleeping with their wives, both of their wives. This guy, I'm telling you, bro, he was a bad individual. Yes, the one that's in everybody's living room that people pray to and everything, that individual. And I know how people feel, because, my family's Catholic, my grandma and all that, they have a shrine and everything. And I would tell them this, and they get all offended and stuff like that, right? But this is only the truth, right? I only come and spit the facts, right? So the individual was a very, very bad person. So when, Marvelous was talking about the individual's past, yes, that individual that everybody has tattooed on them and worship, yeah, that's not Jesus. And yes, that guy was a very, very bad person. Somebody who had no moral compass, who was somebody that people shouldn't look up to or praise or even want to get tattooed on them. And that's just the facts of things. That is not how Jesus looked. Look, even though it was back, how do you guys know it was so back then? Look, human behavior, the way the world is, right? It doesn't take, a genius to see that. How could this person look the way he looked living in the area where he lived, bro? Like, come on now, you know what I'm saying? Like, it just doesn't happen. Like, where the hell did he get all those, Caucasian or Anglo-Saxon characteristics from, bro? You know what I mean? But the reason why Alexander had Da Vinci paint, and Da Vinci was a famous painter and everything, he had them pretty much erase how Jesus really looked and replaced it with his son. Because, like I said, they wanted to influence the world, right? And they did have influence. Jeshurun had influence, like with King Louis and other, powerful figures at the time, right? King Louis being obviously the king of France, right? So, as a matter of fact, he even gave his daughter to him, to Jeshurun, to marry. So this guy had a lot of power and influence amongst different areas and different empires, right? So the guy had a lot of friends in powerful places. You get what I'm saying? So, he was somebody that was feared too, right? Because he ended up leaving the title of bishop, right? Because he never wanted to be bishop, right? He wanted to actually be out there leading the military. As a matter of fact, that's why he killed his brother, because his brother was the one that was in charge of the military. He was jealous of his brother, right? He wanted to be out there leading the army, right? He wanted to be the one out there, with power and stuff like that. He didn't want to be with this whole, living, right, bishop and all that shit, right? So when he ended up killing his brother, he ended up now taking control of the army and now going out there, right? But his downfall was that he was an asshole and somebody who was feared, right? So his own soldiers didn't like him because he was an asshole, right? So it's only a matter of time before your soldiers are gonna now start plotting against you and stop listening to you, which is exactly what happened to him and why he ended up, you know, once his father, died of diseases, right? He pretty much lost all his influence because he's no longer the pope, right? So he was pretty much, from there he just crashed and burned, right? um, it was only a matter of time, like William Shatner says. People shouldn't fear because as long as people shouldn't fear because dictators are only man, and as long as they are man, we already know that man, eventually dies, and as long as they die, we know that freedom will never be taken away from us, completely. Um, because tyrant only lasts, so so long, right? So that was his downfall when it comes to Jezra, Borgia, and the whole family, because the whole family was, corrupted and pretty scandalous, and they pretty much had a pretty good grip on things, during the Renaissance, right? Um, from when they took power, like in 1495 to to that time frame. And yeah, he had all, what people consider Jesus looking. He had it all replaced with now portraits of his son, and that is what people he wanted people to praise and all that. He wanted to get the idea in their heads, right? It was more of a psychological tactic, right? That worked, right? Because a lot of people do think that Jesus is white and looks just like this and like that. Because like I said, they wanted to feel like they were the superior ones. They were better than everybody else. That they were the cream of the crop. So obviously, anybody who's influential, they want them to look just like them, you know? Because only people that look like them could achieve such great status. Is that narcissism in them, bro? You feel me? These are human behaviors that have always existed. It's not these uh, um, personality disorders is not something that's new, right? It has always existed. People's greed and people doing scandalous stuff and backstabbing and jealousy and envy and all of that has always existed, bro. So you can see why a lot of these individuals will fall into all of that, just like in modern day times you see it, happening as well. Like I said, these are just I guess the sins, right? The temptation, right? But yeah, that is an individual who was definitely somebody that people shouldn't pray to or tattoo on them and shit like that, because that is not Jesus. And it's sad that a lot of people lack the knowledge, lack the information, right? And just go based off of what has always been told to you, or just because your parents see it that way, and it's so now you're gonna now pass that teachings. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's better just to you know think for yourself and educate yourself. Education is always going to be key whenever it comes to the game of life, right? you know when you have a sharp mind, it's harder for people to manipulate you. This is the greatest tool and the greatest weapon you could ever have. So it's always important to maintain it and to feed it. you know but overall, that's just my opinion on the matter. What did you guys think? Leave your opinions in the comments. If Shadow, we up.